A blessed day to everyone. Join us in learning the rich history of Methodism in the Philippines, its early beginnings, its rise and integration in the Philippine society, and Filipino religious consciousness. Together with our accomplishment and milestones, we will also discuss past ecclesiastical conflicts and nationalistic fervor in attaining self determination, which eventually led to major schisms such as the Yemelip Church in 1909, the Philippine Methodist Church in 1933, and ang Iglesia Metodista sa Pilipinas in 2011. This endeavor is made possible through the efforts of the members of this group, which are composed of the following: Pastor Sotico Pagulayan, Pastor John Joseph Antonio, Pastor Glenn Alhambra, Pastor Marben De Leon, Pastor Donna Reyes, Pastor Michael Novino, Pastor Benji Rarugal, Pastor Hanelin Ono, Pastor Dante Datun, and Pastor Giovanni Russell Bosita.
Good afternoon, everyone. To begin on our report in Methodism in the Philippines, I would like to introduce my team, for we are divided into different categories or a group. Pastor Sotico, Pastor John Joseph, Pastor Marben, and Pastor Glenn. And we are assigned to present the beginning of Methodism in the Philippines up to the formation of United Methodist Church. To see the history, Spanish-American War, cession of the Philippines to the United States. The 19th century was American period of expansionism for economic growth and national defense under the guise of manifest destiny. Means expansion of America over territories not clearly defined as to ownership in order to extend the blessing of American freedom to people who wanted to achieve self-realization. Even the Protestants believed that American expansionism in 1898 was divinely inspired. These are the racial superiority, America as the center of civilization, purity of American Christianity, and promote English as the language of mankind. Nationalism pervaded the Filipino psyche. Filipinos resented American occupation of the Philippines after the Treaty of Paris of December 10, 1898. They believe they won their independence but was snatched from them by the Americans. Filipinos, although anti-freer of pro-Protestant, had no warmth for any American whom they suspect as not different from the former Spanish colonizers. The atrocities inflicted upon the Filipinos were tortures in the form of flogging, water cure, etc. American Filipino efforts to establish Methodism. Early American efforts were not effective due to language barriers, insufficient financial support, lack of trained missionaries, strange environment, etc. McLaughlin reported to, in May 1900, with experience in mission work and ignorance of the language, we were almost appalled of the problem which presented themselves. Missionary residents in the province lagged far behind the extension of evangelistic movement. They could not effectively evangelize the large territories they opened up to Methodist work. Sickness had slowly reduced the number of missionaries in active work. The Filipino Protestants were enlisted to work alongside the American missionaries. The Filipino workers gave body and permanence to the areas opened up by the missionaries. Growing antagonism between American missionaries and the Filipino Methodists. The missionaries supported the doctrine of manifest destiny against Philippine aspirations for independence. Before the Americans came to the Philippines, religious practices other than those sanctioned by Roman Catholicism were forbidden by law. Strict religious loyalty to Rome was deemed just as important as was full political loyalty to Madrid. Divergent religious or political views were held to equally evil and traitorous by the Spanish governmental and ecclesiastical authorities. It was but natural that this whole oppressive situation should change when the United States, when its Protestant and democratic heritage replaced Spain. Early beginnings. Ang Metodismo ay lumaganap sa Pilipinas noong panahon ng Spanish-American War, mga taong 1898, sa pamamagitan ng misyonerong Amerikano. When Admiral Dewey defeated the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay in May 1898, American rule over and replaced the Spanish colonial administration. Bishop Homer C. Stantz supported Gov. William H. Taft's statements in 1901 and 1905, which reaffirmed American policy that U.S. would retain sovereignty over the Philippines until it is capable of self-government. The missionaries took comfort on the permanent occupation of the Philippines as guarantee for the American administration, capitalism, and missionary effort. On August 28, 1899, President William McKinley made it clear that American authority and sovereignty in the Philippines as absolute. He believed that the Philippine-American War, then raging, was due to an unwarranted attack upon American authority by a body of insurgents who wanted political freedom, in no sense representing this sentiment of the people of their island. August 28, 1898 was Sunday, was the first Protestant service held in the Philippines, led by Chaplain George Stahl, a member of the Methodist Episcopal Church. The Methodist faith first reached the shores of the Philippines through Reverend Major George Stahl, a chaplain of the Methodist Episcopal Church who came with the occupying forces. Reverend Stahl conducted the first Protestant worship service in the country on August 28, 1898, within an old Spanish dungeon facing Manila Bay. March 2, 1899, the first Protestant work in the Philippines. Bishop James Mills Tuborn conducted the first officially sanctioned Methodist worship in the country on March 5, 1899 at Teatro Filipino at Calle Etchaguen, Quiapo, Manila. The evangelistic meetings were largely attended by American soldiers, and a number of them were brought into the membership of the Methodist Church. Bishop Tuborn, in good Wesleyan tradition,
organized the converts into classes under Arthur Proch. He was a layman, at the same time licensed local preacher, assisted Bishop Tuborn through the initial part of the work. The pioneer of Methodist Episcopal Church, sina Arthur W. Proch at may bahay na si Eliza, ay dumating mula sa India noong 1898 at nanguna sa gawaing relihiyosa para sa mga sundalong Amerikano, katulong ang mag-amang Paulino at Nicolas Zamora. Ang mga misyonerong Amerikano ay nagsimula ng misyon, subalit ang mga pastor at mga prediktador ng mga Pilipino ay nagtatag ng mga kongregasyong Metodista sa pangunguna ni Reverend Nicolas Zamora. Si Nicolas Zamora became the first ordained Filipino preacher who was ordained by Bishop Tuborn in March 1900. His father was Paulino Zamora, and his uncle was the famous Father Jacinto Zamora. Paulino then obtained a Bible and disobeyed the rule of the Roman Catholic Church. Father of Nicolas Zamora, he later disobeyed the rules of the Roman Catholic Church by obtaining a Bible from a sea captain and studying it in a secret. Paulino Zamora was thrown into Bilibid prison. Later, he was banished to an island in Mediterranean and was not released until the Treaty of Paris was signed with the United States in 1899. A word should be said about Zamora family. The uncle of Paulino Zamora was the famous Filipino priest, Father Jacinto Zamora, who along with the Father Jose Burgos and Mariano Gomez, and we know the name Gom Burza, has been garroted to death in 1872 by governmental authorities on the basis of trumped-up charges made by the Spanish friars. These three Filipino nationalists were falsely linked by the friars to the Cavite Mutiny of that year. Bunga ng pangangaral ni Arthur Proch, Jess McLean at Nicolas Zamoran, natatag noong 1900 to 1901 ang mga Iglesia Metodista sa Cervantes, Santa Cruz, Tondo, Pandacan, Tambo, San Miguel, Bacood at mga lalawigan ng Rizal, Bataan, Bulacan at Pampanga. Ilan sa mga kilalang pastor na Pilipino ay sina Nicolas Zamora ng Tondo, Diosdado Alvarez ng Knox Memorial sa Cervantes at Marikina, si Reverend Alejandro H. Reyes ng Malabon, Victoriano Mariano, Polo at Obando, Valeriano Villanueva ng Santa Mesa. Ilan sa mga manggagawang laiko ay sina Arsenio Bartolome, Nicolasa at Euprasia Feliciano, Florencio Nadurata, Santiago Tanghal, Epifanio Garcia at mga kaanib ng ang katotohanan sa Tondo. Magandang samahan ng mga unang misyonerong Amerikano, si Toburn, Proch, Warnes at McLean at kamanggagawang Pilipino na si Zamora, Mariano, Castro, Lozada at mga iba pa. Si Dr. Annie Norton, Miss Julia Winsner at Miss Margaret Cody was Women's Foreign Missionary Society. They organized boarding schools for girls in Manila, which is now called Harris Deaconess School. Ang pagpapalaganap at pamamahala ng Methodistang Episkopal sa Pilipinas. Ito ang mga unang misyonerong nagsidating, si Julia Wisner, misyonero mula sa Burma, Cornelia Much, Evangelista, Mary Cody, isang guro, Anna Norton, manggagamot, noong February 26, 1900. Local preacher, Thomas Hartin, March 26, 1900. Reverend Jess L. McLean, May 9, 1900. Hinirang na presiding elder. At noong August 20, 1900, the first District Conference of Methodists in the Philippines held at the Methodist Girls School in Ermita, presided by Bishop Frank Warren with Reverend McLean as district presiding elder. Summer 1901, rapid movement of Methodism in the Philippines exceed the total visible missionary result in China in 15 years. We can see in our slides the Evangelical Union was formed in the year 1901. Evangelistic effort in the islands were done by the Baptist, Presbyterian, Congregationalists, United Brethren, the Disciples of Christ, Christian and Missionary Alliance, the Seventh-day Adventists, and the Episcopalians. The Methodists were signed in Bulacan, Pampanga, Tarlac, Nueva Ecija, Nueva Vizcaya, Pangasinan, Zambales, Bataan, Cagayan, and Ilocos Sur. And in 1901, there were no understanding made between Evangelical Union and Gregorio Aglipay and Bishop Isabella de los Reyes. The Evangelical Union in the year 1901 to bring about a spirit of comity, unity, and cooperation. They agreed on to divide the country in mission fields to avoid duplication and competition. Manila was opened to all mission. In Methodist, they were assigned in Bulacan, Pampanga, Tarlac, Nueva Vizcaya, Nueva Ecija, Pangasinan, Zambales, Bataan, Cagayan, and Ilocos Sur. The Presbyterian were assigned in Rizal, Cavite, Laguna, Tayabas, Batangas, Camarines Norte, Albay, Sorsogon, Masbate, Cebu, Leyte, Bohol, Negros Oriental, and Samar. The United Brethren was assigned La Union and Mountain Province. The Disciples of Christ were assigned Ilocos Norte, Abra, and Northern Mindanao. The Baptists were assigned Panay, Southern Mindoro, Romblon, and Negros Occidental. The Congregationalists were assigned in Mindanao except the western end, and the Christian Missionary Alliance, the Southern Mindanao, and Sulu was their assignment.
Early evangelistic efforts, 1903 District Conference by Reverend G. L. McLaughlin reported 40 organized congregations in 50 places along the territorial boundaries, 22 chapels with seating capacity from 150 to 1,000 each. Each congregation had 1 to 5 exhorters and local preachers, with missionaries visiting the congregations. 1904, Mexico became the center of work in Pampanga, who had 14 members in the town. Establishment of Harris Memorial School for the Training of Women as Deaconesses in 1903, established by Miss Winifred Spalding in 1903, and development by Miss Margaret Decker from 1905 to 1940. These are sent by Women's Foreign Missionary Society, mission agency of the Methodist Episcopal Church. Complements UTS and courses such as Bible English, music, religious education, field work, hygiene, embroidery, and cookery was located in Sampaloc, Manila, and the move back in the General Luna in 1948 near to Union Seminary. 1905, the Philippine Islands District Conference was elevated to Philippine Islands Mission Conference, made it independent of the Malaysia Annual Conference, and paved the way for its transitions to an annual conference by 1906. There were 3 districts: Manila, Northern Luzon, and Central Luzon. In 1906, the Florence B. Nicholson Bible Seminary was established out of the donation of $10,000 by Mr. Nicholson, with Reverend Harry Farmer as president. Later, F.B. Nicholson Seminary merged with the Ellenwood Presbyterian Bible School to form the Union Theological Seminary, legally incorporated in 1912. Founded in 1907 by the Methodist and Presbyterian missions, when the Florence B. Nicholson Seminary organized in 1906 at Dagupan, and the Ellenwood Bible Training Schools organized in 1905 in Manila, were merged into one union institution devoted from the theological education. 1911, the United Brethren Church joined. 1916, the Disciples joined. 1919, the Congregationalists joined. Mary Johnston Hospital built in 1908. In 1906, Dr. Rebecca Paris organized the Dispensaria Bitanya, which evolved into the Mary Johnston Hospital in 1908. Out of that $12,500 donation of Mr. D.S.B. Johnston in memory of his wife. December 10, 1906, Dr. Rebecca Paris, 20 years of labor of the first women physician in the Philippines, founded Dispensaria Bitanya on the first floor of Women Bible School in Rizal Avenue. In 1908, the dispensary grew into a hospital from the funds of missionary wife, Mr. D.S.B. Johnston, who died in the city, Mary Johnston. In 1911, first class of nurses graduated from the hospital. Bishop Dionisio D. Alejandro was the first Filipino bishop of the Methodist Church, elected in 1944. The two great churches in the Philippines Methodism, ito ang Central and Knox UMC. Central MEC, or also known as English Speaking Church, now Central UMC. 1901, the church opened on December 23, 1901. It was located along the San Luis Street, na ngayon ay Calao Street, corner Nozaleda Street, na ngayon ay General Luna Street, where the Department of Tourism now stands. Just across the current location of Central UMC, Governor General William H. Taft, future U.S. President. Although a Unitarian, reportedly attended this church to hear Reverend Homer Stans preach. How did they raise funds to build Central MEC in 1901? They sold shares to a cost of $1 per share. Here is a certificate for the 10 shares bought by the missionary Cornelia Mutz and signed by Major Elijah Hafford, a secretary and Homer Stans pastor. Central MEC Chinese congregation, along with some members of the MEC mission, Christmas on 1902 by Reverend Paul Kyung on the Fokho Annual Conference, briefly led this ministry. Central Methodist Episcopal Church, Manila in 1908 and 1909. In 1906, Central Church's temporary wooden chapel built in 1901 was replaced by this brick structure on the same location along the corner of San Luis or Calao and Nozaleda General Luna Streets on the same lot where the Department of Tourism is now located. It was built through the efforts of Reverend George A. Mailer and completed in late 1906 after all its debt had been paid of the 45,000 peso. Structure was formally dedicated on August 15, 1907. It was designed by C.B. Ripley, a renowned architect from Hawaii. Siya'y kalaunan ay naging member din ng Central UMC. Knox Memorial Methodist Episcopal Church, 1907. Construction of Knox MEC along Cervantes Street, na ngayon ay Rizal Avenue or Avenida sa Santa Cruz, Manila, was started sometime in October 1906 and completed in late 1907. The church was also commonly called First Filipino Church, tracing its roots to the Filipino congregation established by Arthur Crouch, the Soldiers Institute in Plaza de Giote on May 28, 1898. The congregation later worshipped in a Teatro Filipino in Quiapo and later at Teatro Libertad in Santa Cruz, until finding its permanent home in Calle Cervantes when a provisional chapel was inaugurated on July 19, 1903.
Mapagpalang araw po. My report is all about founding and early propagation of the Iglesia Evangelica Metodista in Las Islas Filipinas. To start with my report, I want to introduce the founder of the Yemelief, Nicolas E. Villegas Zamora. He was known as the first Filipino ordained pastor. He was also known as the Moises of the Evangelical in the Philippines. Nicolas Zamora was a fearless missionary of Pauline caliber who was not daunted by any size or type of audience. At one Thanksgiving service he conducted in 1902, he preached to thousands of persons. He was referred to as the Martin Luther of the Philippines, the John Wesley of the Philippines, the Apostle Paul of the brown race, el primer líder de la libertad religiosa en Filipinas, or the foremost leader of religious liberty in the Philippines. Nicolas Zamora was born in Binondo, Manila, on September 10, 1875, of Don Paulino Zamora and Stefania Villegas. He married Isabel de Guia on March 2, 1897, according to the rites of the Roman Catholic faith at the Church of the Assumption in Bulacan, Bulacan. Their marriage was blessed with 8 children: Trinidad, Isabel, Jaime, Augusto, Caridad, Nenita, Manuel, and Esperanza. The death and burial on September 14, 1914, in the presence of his family and some ministers and church members, the Reverend Nicolas Zamora joined his creator. He was only 39 years old. He left behind a grieving church of 11,000 members. At the height of his ministry, the Reverend Nicolas Zamora fell ill on September 1, 1914, while holding office in Manila. His attending specialist physician Dr. Papa of Manila and Dr. Ramirez of Bukawe, Bulacan diagnosed his ailment as kidney disease with heart complication. When his ill worsened and he knew that the end was near, Pastor Zamora summoned the Reverend Alejandro H. Reyes, then the second Secretary General, second to the highest of the church, to enjoin all pastors and members. Thus, Zamora said, "Abide in your faith, and obey the gospel of Jesus. Love the church of the Lord as you have seen me love her. Persevere in your responsibilities as loyal Christians and servants of the Lord Jesus, for a man's honor lies in the fulfillment of his responsibility." In Tagalog, Zamora said, "Mahalin ninyo ang iglesia. Manatili kayo sa pananampalataya. Tupdin ninyo ang inyong tungkulin, sapagkat ang karangalan ng tao ay ang tumupad sa kanyang tungkulin." The factors leading to the Yemelip Schism from the Methodist Episcopal Church. The principle of religious freedom made it easy for the missionaries to evangelize the Filipinos. Due to the tension caused by the war, it was necessary to have separate meetings for the Americans and the Filipino Christians in Manila during the early months of 1900. The Filipino Methodists were dissatisfied with the American chauvinism, which led them to criticize and challenge the missionaries. American missionaries failed to appreciate the bad effects of the irritations and indignities inflicted upon Filipinos. Realizing the unchanged attitudes and practices of the American missionaries, as well as the growing disenchantment of the ang katotohanan members in the church, it was not difficult for Nicolas Zamora to cast his ministry with them, for he himself was a nationalist at heart. Nicolas Zamora was convinced that separation from the mother church was the only solution to the growing enmity between American and Filipinos. Mga dahilan o factors ng mga hiwalayan or schism sa Methodista Episcopal. Ang unang dahilan, alinlangan or doubt ang mga Pilipino sa kahulugan ng prinsipyong manifest destiny ng Amerika. Sa gitna ng balak nitong to uplift, educate, Christianize, and prepare them for self-government. Ang paniwala ng marami ay balak ng Amerika na manatili sa Pilipinas upang gawin itong base militar sa Asia at pagyamanin ang bayan sa kapakinabangan ng ekonomiya ng Amerika. Hindi rin matanggap na ang Pilipinas ay white man's burden ng mga puti. Pangalawang dahilan, katutubo sa Pilipino ang mithiing maging malaya or desire for freedom. Bagaman tinatanaw ng mga Pilipino na utang na loob ang tulong ng Amerika sa pagpapaalis ng mga Kastila at pagpapalaganap ng diwa ng rebellism and justice, Hindi ibig na maging kolonyal ng dayuhan ang kanilang bayan, maging sa larangan ng politika at relihiyon. Katunayan nito ang paghiwalay ng Aglipayano sa Romano Katoliko 1903 at Cristianos Vivos sa Metodista 1905. Pangatlong dahilan ng paghiwalay ng Gemelli sa Metodista Episcopal ang paghamak sa kakanyahan ng mga Pilipino na mamahala o paternalistic attitude sa sariling pamahalaan o simbahan, labis ang paniniwala ng mga puti na tungkulin nila ang gabayan ang mga kayumanggi. Bunga ito ng paniniwalang Anglo-Saxon superiority. Lalong pinaigting ng mga balitang paghamak sa kakayahan ng mga Pilipino na mamahala ng pag-usapan sa Kongreso ng Amerika ang otonomiya para sa Pilipinas. Ito ang karanasan ng kapisanan, ang katotohanan sa kanilang programa ng pagmimisyon. Ang ikaapat na dahilan, lantarang pagtatangi dahil sa lahi o race. Ito ang sukdulan ng pagpapasensya ng mga Pilipino sa pang-aapi ng mga banyaga sa sarili nilang bayan. Maging si Obispo Oldham ay nagpaalala na sa mga Amerikano sa samang idudulot ng lantarang pagtatangi laban sa mga Pilipino. Una, mga sundalo at opisyal na nagturing na ang mga Pilipino ay Niger. Pangalawa, hindi pantay na pasweldo. Pangatlo, hindi pantay na accommodation sa mga sasakyan, hotel. At ikaapat, magkaibang pagkain at iba pa. At panglima, walang basihang pag-aalis ng karapatan at tungkulin o pagkilala sa kontribusyon ng mga Pilipino sa loob ng Iglesia. On February 20, 1909, Nicolas Zamora gathered at the residence of local preacher Moises Buson at Quezada Street, Tondo. The members of the Ang Katotohanan, namely Diosdado Alvarez, Alejandro Reyes, Moises Buson, Ricardo Losada, Eusebio Tec, Santiago Tanghal, Hilario Aniceto, Valeriano Mariano, Santos Trinidad, Ignacio Bartolome, Pio Banta, Lorenzo Basilio, Pedro Delpin, Rufino Bautista, and Eusebio Domingo. Ang hiwalayan sa Metodista Episcopal noong Pebrero 28, 1909. Kongregasyon ng Metodista Episcopal sa Tondo or St. Paul's Church, Calle Moriones, ang duyang pinagsimulan ng hiwalayan mula pa noong 1904. Pinangunahan ng kapisanan ang katotohanan na kinabibilangan ni Felipe Marquez, Moises Buson, Victoriano Mariano, Pedro, at Siberiano Castro, Cirilo Casiguran, Eugenio Monico, Leoncio Ronquillo, Sinfronso Ponce, at Luis Ocampo. Layunin ng kapisanan na pabilisin ang ebanghelisasyon sa pinaniniwalaan nilang mabagal dahil kulang sa suporta ng misyong Metodista. Gumawa sila ng pamamaraan, nag-abuluyan ng piso bawat buwan, at nagtaguyod ng misyon ayon sa kanilang minarapat. Minasama ng mga misyonero ang kanilang ginawa at pinag-alinlangan pa ang kanilang katapatan sa Iglesia Metodista. Dahil sa paternalistic treatment at pagdududa ng mga misyonero sa kanila, binalak nilang humiwalay sa Iglesia. Napigil sila ni Pastor Zamora, destinadong pastor sa Cervantes, ngunit inilipat ni Obispo Oldham noong 1906 sa Tondo upang manatili sa Metodista. Pagpapatibay ng Komperensya General Amerika noong 1909 na maging home field status sa halip na foreign field status ang iglesia sa Pilipinas. Dito natiyak ni Pastor Zamora na ang diwa ng sariling pamamahala or autonomy ay hindi na matutupad. Nadadama ni Pastor Zamora ang patuloy na mababang pagpapalagay ng mga misyonero sa kapwa nila manggagawang Pilipino sa tungkulin sa iglesia, sweldo, destino, bagay na kanyang kinamuhian. Maging si Pastor Zamora sa gitna ng pagiging pangunahing ibanghilista, guro sa seminaryo, at taas ng pinag-aralan, ay nakadama ng tindi ng racial discrimination. Hindi siya tinigilan ng kapisanang ang katotohanan noong pang 1904 ay nagnais ng humiwalay hanggang mahikayat nila si Pastor Zamora sa mga simulain ng nasyonalismo sa larangan ng relihiyon. Hindi sila nahirapan sa paghikayat kay Pastor Zamora sapagkat siya man ay nagmula sa pamilyang makabayan at nakita ang pagsama ng samahan ng mga Pilipino at mga misyonero. Grito de combate ay kung paanong biniyayaan ng Diyos ang mga taga-ibang lupa na magtatag at mamahala sa sariling iglesia. Ang mga Pilipino ay gayon din.
The group decided on the following on the basis of the separation. First basis is a self-governance. The slogan of the movement was in the same manner that the God has endowed other nations the right to manage their own church, and the same right belongs to the Filipinos. The letter circular of Secretary General Diosdado Alvarez started like this: Kami ay walang sama ng loob ni puot sa mga Amerikano at mga kapanalig nila, kung di lamang ibig kami ay magsarili na. The second basis of the separation is self-propagation. Missionary efforts shall be pursued by Filipinos using methods attuned to Filipino way of life. And the last one is a self-support. It says self-reliance financially shall be the ultimate goal in funding the ministry of the church. There are two names were suggested. First is the Iglesia Evangelica and Filipinas, and the other one is the Iglesia Methodista, the Filipinas. To break the deadlock, Reverend Zamora decided on Iglesia Evangelica Methodista in Las Islas Filipinas. The acronym EMALIF was coined from the initial letters of the full name of the church. It was the result of the full name of the church. It was the result of the contest during the ministerial conference in 1915 held in Malibay congregations to determine the short name of the church. Reverend Felix Berto Reyes won the contest. February 28, 1904, Sunday, during 9 o'clock morning Tagalog service at St. Paul Methodist Church, located in Morianos Tondo, the proclamation sermon of Reverend Zamora is heard. And it was based on Galatians chapter 5, verse 1. And it clearly says like this: It is for the freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm and do not let yourself be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. The exodus of members almost stripped St. Paul's circuit of its members. In addition to the initial members who withdrawn together with Nicholas Zamora, 25 evangelistic workers, about 1/4 of full-time evangelists, and 1,500 members and provisioners. 1910, the remaining members in the circuit was down to only 80. Chase McClellan reported at the year after the break, the new church had 3,000 members. Articles of Incorporation found in Article 2 also provides that the sacraments and rites of the Emalif shall conform with the rituals of the Methodist Episcopal Church. First ministerial conference was held on last Sunday, February 1910, at the residence of Arsenio and Nicolaza Bartolome at the number 17 Moriones Tondo, Manila. Two important actions were taken. The elected officers for 1910 and 1913. Reverend Nicolas Zamora voted as General Superintendent. General Secretary was Gestado Alvarez. Assistant Secretary was Reverend Alejandro Reyes, and the Treasurer was Ricardo Lozada. They formulated the program of evangelism. There are early efforts to propagate the Humanist in the year 1909 to 1914, and the conditions obtained at the start of the church is like this. The lack of qualified workers. Only the sworn ministers separated from Methodist Church and like Zamora, Alvarez, Reyes, and Mariano were qualified. To improve the qualifications and increase the numbers of workers, additional workers were trained and were ordained deacon. In the likes of Juan Espring, Victoriano Laksa from Pampanga, Francisco Gregorio Bonifacio Mangalindan of Bulacan, Francisco Juane from Nueva Ecija, Hipolito Gernalda of Pangasinan, Victoriano Mauricio, Epifanio Garcia, Leonicio Jorge of Rizal, P. Ubanta, Pedro Castro, Ignacio Bartolome, Ricardo Lozada of Manila, and Manuel Reyes of Bataan. They were ordained by Nicolas Zamora and Charles Darley, a Presbyterian from South America, on January 2, 1910. One of the conditions during the beginning of the church is the lack of financial support. The bulk of the church constituency belongs to the poor. Organizers themselves conducted mission works on the self-supporting basis. Contributions came slow. Zamora himself appealed for funds at the end of evangelistic meetings, and he usually sang at the tune of Blessed Assurance. And the following, kayang samo ko ay pakinggan, ang kolekta ay dagdagan, upang magkaroon ng kakayahan ang banal na kapisanan. Another condition, if for the lack of church buildings, the congregations met at the houses of members. Special occasions were held at the movie houses and public buildings. They formulated also evangelistic strategies, and the message centered on two topics. A, and the nationalism to win members from the foreign missionary churches. And the next is the exposition of the faulty Roman Catholic doctrines. To maximize the evangelistic efforts, Reverend Zamora divided the mission field among the available workers. Like in Northern Luzon, Hipolito Gernalda took over. For Central Luzon, Pastor Alejandro H. Reyes. For Southern Luzon, Pastor Victoriano Mariano. And for Manila, Nicolas Zamora with a Tondole preacher. For Caloocan, Florencio Nadorata. And for Pasay, Gregorio Ginogino. While in Parañaque, there were two, Santiago and Epifanio Garcia took over. Open-air evangelism in public places and street corners were held. An example of this, Zamora would send a musical band in public places to attract a crowd. Started the activity by singing hymns, followed by a sermon, usually on the topic of religious nationalism and the fallacy of the Roman Catholic doctrine of salvation, and in the end he would encourage the crowd to ask questions. Jose de la Cruz entered the cockpit during the lull period of betting. He stood and asked permission to entertain the aficionados. Instead, he would deliver sermon. Another thing were the debating with Roman Catholic priest or Iglesia ni Cristo on the doctrine of salvation become almost a regular activities. House-to-house visitation usually undertaken by lay person. and in church evangelism. Methodist Episcopal congregation affected by schism. And these are the results. From St. Paul's congregation in Tondo, 500 members out of 600 joined the new church. The central district comprising Bulacan, Tarlac, and Nueva Ecija was mostly affected. In Bulacan, the entire congregation of Atlag joined Nicolas Zamora. Only its pastor, Reverend Felix Cruz, stayed. The entire congregation of Gatbuca, through the effort of Reverend Francisco Gregorio, joined the movement. In Nueva Ecija, almost all Methodist membership in Piñaranda and in Papaya joined the movement through the leadership of Reverend Francisco Juane. And in Tarlac, only the Methodist congregation of Panique joined the new church. And in the Northern District was hardly influenced by the movement due to its distance from Manila.
The rise of the Philippine Methodist Church. The second major split, to some degree, was determined by nationalistic feelings, same as the first schism. The background and how it started, however, is quite different. Here are the timeline and story that give rise to the Philippine Methodist Church. Melesio de Armas was expelled from the ministry on the charge of adultery in the Philippine Church, but appellate committee of the General Conference put down all charges and restored de Armas. Reverend Cipriano Navarro raised the question of the right of the General Conference to reverse the Armas decision. However, Bishop Welch stated that there are no way to overrule the General Conference. The statement of Bishop Welch failed to satisfy Navarro and a number of others at the conference. They felt that the bishop was inefficient in his administrative duties. Reverend S.W. Stagg, a missionary pastor of Central Students Church, was among who felt the same. It was also during this time that missionaries are recalled by the Board of Foreign Missions due to severe financial difficulties, but the Staggs strongly desired to stay in the Philippines. On the same annual conference, the body passed a resolution protesting the recall of the Staggs. Bishop Welch said that there was no way to overrule the decision of the General Conference. Reverend Navarro stood and said that he wished to surrender his ministerial credentials and added on making a motion wherein he said the course of events had made it clear that connectionalism with the General Conference in America and supervision of our churches in the Philippines as provided by such conference is no longer a source of true inspiration and wise leadership. I therefore move that we here and now declare ourselves independent from the American General Conference. The motion was declined and declared by Bishop Welch as out of order. Reverend Navarro, however, called out, "All who favor this motion will say aye." In response, a shout of aye came from a number not counted. No negative was called for. On March 25, 1933, 27 ordained ministers, 5 American missionaries, some deaconesses, and Bible women left the annual conference held at San Nicolas, Pampanga, and organized the Philippine Methodist Church. In 1941, it was said that there's 12,000 members, 87 congregation, 64 pastors, 334 women workers, and 100 lay preachers that represent the Philippine Methodist Church. In 1948, the Philippine Methodist Church became one of the founding bodies of the United Church of Christ in the Philippines. And Reverend Cipriano Navarro was elected one of the 4 bishops of the new church. The 1933 split, like the one in 1909, was not caused by one particular ecclesiastical ruling. The underlying issue was self-determination by the Filipinos in their religious affairs, an issue that the experience of the Philippine history has made especially strong.
I remember when I was the president of the Young Adult Fellowship in New Life United Methodist Church in Rosario, Pasig. Way back in 2007 to 2010, I witnessed the annual conference of Rizal Philippines Annual Conference East or RPACE held at the Prayer Garden of United Methodist Church in Tikling, Taytay, Rizal, and the resident bishop of Manila Episcopal Area or MIA was Reverend Lito Tanguna. One of the things I will never forget from Bishop Tangunan's revelations during the time of annual conference is the corruption within the United Methodist Church, particularly in the rental lands and establishments owned by the United Methodist Churches. He said he will investigate it. Later, I just realized that he has left United Methodist Church and established his own sect or denominations. And this is ang Iglesia Metodista ng Pilipinas that I will share with you today as a representative reporter or Group 3. Good day to all my dear classmates, especially to our Professor, Sir Ferdinand Ano. Ang Iglesia Metodista sa Pilipinas or AIMP, Source United Methodist Insight by David W. Scott. Split was led by Reverend Lito C. Tangunan. Tangunan was serving as a district superintendent prior to his election on November 2008 and was an outspoken proponent of autonomy for the United Methodist Church in the Philippines and critic of the global structure of the United Methodist Church. Ironically, the split was not an organized movement but a result of some charges filed against him. Accused of sexually assaulting a female assistant, Tangunan denied the charges, referring to them as a smear campaign. In December 2009, the Philippines College of Bishops placed Tangunan on paid leave as his case was considered, a decision whose legitimacy was affirmed by the Judicial Council in April 2010. Retired Bishop Daniel Arechea was assigned to replace Tangunan as interim bishop. Starting in January 2010, while barred from the Episcopal Office building, he called annual conference meetings in areas where he had strong support. The Judicial Council ruled against Tangunan and for Bishop Arechea 5 times, once in 2010, 3 times in 2011, and once in 2012, in determining which annual conference meeting had been the validly constituted one. In July 2011, Tangunan did not attend a meeting with Bishop Goodpaster in Georgia that was aimed at resolving the conflict. Instead, Tangunan released a public letter to Good Pastor calling his suspension illegal, reputing the right of the Philippines College of Bishops or the United Methodist Church Council of Bishops to oversee him, and referring to himself as the legitimate elected bishop. Tangunan officially resigned from the United Methodist Church later in 2011. Paperwork to register the new denomination, daang Iglesia ng Metodista sa Pilipinas, as a corporate entity was filed on December 2011. Tangunan was then elected as a new bishop of the denomination. Approximately 130 churches and 2,000 members left with Tangunan. According to ang Iglesia Metodista ng Pilipinas own reporting, though some of those churches have been returned to the United Methodist Church and control of others remains disputed, these numbers represent about 7% of churches and 1.5% of Filipino United Methodist Church members at the time. However, the defections were not spread evenly across the Philippines, with a majority in the West Middle Philippines, Philippines Cavite, and Palawan annual conferences.
Impact or result. Supporters in Nueva Ecija, where several churches earlier joined the schismatic organization, returned as a bloc to the UMC fold in last year's Unity Conference of the Middle Philippines Annual Conference. A majority of the churches or mission in Midpac in its Aurora district, however, have remained ambivalent to rejoin the UMC. 8 churches remain with the UMC in Aurora. The UMC also recovered schools in Cabcaben, Hermosa, and has filed legal cases of perjury against those responsible for improperly incorporating UMC local churches which schismatic members took over in 2010.
Kung titingnan mo yung karanasan ng United Methodist Church sa split ng AMP, hindi siya ganun kaorganisado. Kasi sinimulan yung movement, although sinasabi na si Tangunan ay vocal na pro doon sa autonomy, campaign ng autonomy ng United Methodist Church. Pero kung titingnan mo, yung start ng movement ay para mabuo yung MP ay nagsimula pa doon nung kinasuhan siya ng sexual assault. So pwedeng sinakyan lang yung issue or ginamit lang siya para matabunan yung issue ng sexual assault, yung kaso niya. Pwedeng ganun ang nangyari. Hindi siya ganun kaorganisado kasi wala siyang platform, wala siyang grupo, wala siyang campaign. Unlike ngayon, itong bago ngayon na Christmas Covenant, may plano, may mga nangunguna, ganyan. Pangalawa, yung split ng AMP ay wala ding impact sa buong United Methodist Church ng buong Pilipinas. Particular sa akin na taga Mindanao na lumaki sa local church kasi both parents ko ay pastor. Hindi ko narinig na pinag-usapan yan. Hindi siya naging issue. Hindi siya naging ganoon kalaking issue. Narinig ko lang siya, nalaman ko lang siya na meron parang ganong nangyari dito sa MEA noong pumasok na ako sa ministry. So siguro ang nakakaalam lang niyan noon sa DEA ay yung mga nasa leadership, mga executive, ganyan. Unlike sa ito ngayong Christmas Covenant ngayon, na kahit yung mga laiko, yung mga members ng local church ay nagde-debate. Nagiging issue sa Sunday school, sa lahat ng mga usapin sa iglesia. May narinig din ako na, meron din akong experience na local church doon sa amin na nag-split, umalis siya sa church. Pinalitan yung pangalan ng simbahan, sumama yung mga membro, nagtayo ng sarili niyang community of faith yung pastor. Na-report naman siya sa annual conference, pero hindi din ganun kalaki yung impact niya. Parang, okay, sige, ialis na natin siya sa listahan. Ganun lang siya. So, yun pala yung ibig sabihin pag sinabing Amerocentric. Yun ang analysis sa United Methodist Church na kayang-kaya tayong i-shake ng Amerika. Ibig sabihin, pag sa kanila nagmula yung boses, pag sa kanila nagsimula yung plano, pag sa kanila nagmula ang movement, kayang-kaya nitong i-shake kahit yung pinaka-local na level ng institusyon. So, Amerocentric tayo, may impact talaga sa atin, sa whole life natin as community of faith, pag mula sa Amerika, pag sa kanila galing yung movement. Yung sinabi ko kanina na local church na nag-split, dapat sana nakikita yun ng institution, ng church as an institution, kasi hindi naman mabubuo yung annual conference kung wala yung local church. In fact, hindi ka pwedeng magbuo ng isang district pag hindi mo naabot yung bilang ng local church na dapat meron. Yun dapat isa yung tinitingnan natin sa mga ganitong usapin. And ang isang community of faith, ang isang church as an institution, nagsimula din siya sa maliit. Ang UMC nagsimula siya sa grupo lang ng mga students. So kung hindi tinitingnan, hindi binabigyang pansin yung mga ganoong bagay, malaki pa talaga ang dapat tingnan